The constraint on him so far, he's been playing a long tease with this, hasn't he, for months, creating the expectation that he'd run without explicitly committing to it. And the reason for that is that in American law, once a candidate formally declares themselves, then a whole bunch of regulations and rules come into force, including ones that affect fundraising. So candidates try to keep it vague as long as they can, and Donald Trump has done a masterful job of that. He now seems to be strongly indicating that he will commit himself to campaigning, to running again next week for the next presidential election. And one of the incentives would seem to be for him to do it earlier than necessary, would seem to be that it would perhaps complicate the investigations and prosecutions that are underway into him and his business affairs across half a dozen different jurisdictions and cases. So that might be an attractive option for him to declare his candidacy, and he certainly let us think it'll be next week.
That's really interesting. He really is keeping us guessing meanwhile. Now, Republicans are expected to take the House in these midterm elections. Is the Senate too close to call? What's the state of play?
Well, it is too close to call because there are 3 or 4 Senate seats, each of which are so close to call that they could go either way. So the probabilities just keep exponentially increasing. It just becomes absurdly difficult for anybody sensibly to make a call. But it does seem that at least the House will go to the Republicans, and that then creates a range of complications for US foreign policy. For example, Kevin McCarthy, who would be the Speaker if the Republicans control the House, has said that the House might no longer continue writing large cheques for Ukraine. He's also said that the Republicans would demand that the debt ceiling come into force in the US, meaning the US can't borrow more money and continue servicing its debts, unless the administration cuts its budget, and other complications as well, including it would give them the power and the scope to conduct House investigations into Joe Biden's affairs, including those of his son, Hunter Biden, and his allegedly questionable business deals that the Republicans have been keen to prosecute. So it could throw up difficulties at home and abroad for the Biden administration and the Democrats generally.
Peter, what else is at stake in these midterm elections? What can we expect if Republicans do indeed take the Senate as well?
Well, the really big picture here, I mean, if you're an American voter, then you may well be preoccupied with domestic matters, such as the Democrats are making a big play on the question of abortion, the Republicans are making a big play on the rising cost of living, and these are your likely concerns. Taking a step out of the US, where we are, looking at the US as a global force and our key ally, the really big ticket item here is the continuation of US democracy and liberty and how that fares. Nearly half of all the Republican candidates on the ballot for these elections are election deniers. That is, they refuse to acknowledge that Joe Biden was legally and rightfully elected president, and they claim that Trump won against all evidence. And if you include the ones who refuse to say or refuse to commit or just raise doubts about the legitimacy of Biden's administration, more than half of all the Republican candidates claim that, or in at least the doubter column. So if the Republicans do take the House and perhaps the Senate, it just really increases the ability, the power and the volume of the election deniers and the anti-democratic forces within their system. And for us, for countries, especially democracies outside the US, that is a really big question and a really dangerous one. The Economist magazine's annual Index of Democracies hasn't listed the US as a full democracy for 5 or 6 years now. It lists the US as a flawed democracy and only number 26 on its scale of free countries, and they only rate the top 21 as being full democracies. So the US is already, in their eyes, on the slide. Further validation of the Republican Party and the election denying trademark of that party would be another downward step in that trajectory.
Meanwhile, Putin ally Yevgeny Prigozhin has admitted to interfering in US elections and says he'll continue to do so. How significant is this?
Well, it's pretty significant because, first, he may be telling the truth, and if he is, and we can't be absolutely sure, but if he is telling the truth, then it means that the counter-interference efforts that the US authorities and intelligence community claim that they've successfully operated to suppress foreign interference haven't really worked or haven't fully worked. And if he's lying, it's just more disinformation designed to throw doubts on the legitimacy of the US elections. Either way, it continues to extend, first, the state of confusion and disinformation about US elections and their validity and legitimacy. And second, it reminds us of the rather sinister autocratic undercurrents and relationship that have long existed between Donald Trump and his support base and the Vladimir Putin himself and his regime. A romance, inexplicable romance, which nonetheless seems to continue to this day.
Peter Hartcher, as always, thank you so much.
Pleasure, Yvonne.